distinguished speakers, forum participants, CCG friends, colleagues, good evening and good morning, depending where you are. Thank you for joining the 8th edition of the CCG Annual China and Globalization Forum. My name is Henry Huiyao Wang. I'm the founder and president of Center for China and Globalization. This has been a day full of insightful and productive discussions following 2 online dialogues with former U.S. Treasury Secretary Hank Posen and historian Neil Ferguson, and also over 20 ambassadors roundtable and a China-European roundtable all happened today. So this is our last section of the day. I hope everyone enjoyed the forum so far. Now, we are very honored and pleased to present you the 3rd Forum Special Online Program, China-US Think Tank Dialogue, Realigning the US-China Trade and Economic Relationship, Inflation, Tariffs, and the Way Forward. So I'm Henry Huiyao Wang and delighted to see some of my good friends here. Participants from China are represented by Minister Xiaozhun, former Director General, Deputy Director General of the WTO, and also former Vice Minister of Minister of Commerce of China, and Mr. Jin Xu, President of China Association of International Trade, and former Deputy Director General of America and Oceania Affairs Department of MOFCOM. Participants from US are represented by Craig Allen, President of the China-US Business Council, and also former ambassador, and Wendy Cutler, Vice President of Asia Society Policy Institute and former acting deputy US trade representative, and Adam Posen, President of Peterson Institute for International Economics, and Jeremie Waterman, President of China Center and Vice President of US Chamber of Commerce. So 2020 is the 50th anniversary of President Nixon's ice-breaking visit to China, which led to the normalization of diplomatic relationship and half a century of incredible economic interdependence between world's 2 largest economies. 50 years later, the bilateral relations are regrettably beset by decoupling trend, if that is going to be, and intensified strategic competition. So among the recent meetings and interactions between Beijing and Washington, we are nevertheless witness more dialogues and more communications. So the Biden administration is fighting soaring inflation while the midterm elections are only 4 months away. China is still on the defense against COVID-19 and facing considerable challenge in meeting 5.5% growth target of the year. I had a dialogue with the World Bank chief on global economic prospect just last week, and he was forecasting China below the 5.1% to 4.3%, according to the World Bank latest global economic prospect report. So among all the domestic calls for Washington to remove the tariff imposed by the last administration on the Chinese good, and also China can do the same, will economic headwinds prompt the 2 governments to rethink the strategies in which the sour trade economic ties can be somehow reasonably relinked. So we really look forward to your thoughts. And first, I'd like to introduce our 5, actually 6 distinguished panelists will be invited today. First is Craig Allen. He's the president of US-China Business Council, as I just mentioned. But prior to joining the USCBC, Craig had a long, distinguished career in the US public service. Craig worked in the US Embassy in Beijing in 1992 and served as Minister Counselor in 2002. And he later became a Deputy Assistant Secretary for China. And he was appointed as the United States Ambassador to Brunei in 2014. Our next US guest is Wendy Cutler. She's Vice President at Asia Society Policy Institute and the Managing Director of Washington, D.C. office. She joined the ASP following a very impressive career of nearly 3 decades as a diplomat and negotiator in the Office of U.S. Trade Representative, USTR, where she also served as acting deputy U.S. Trade Representative. She worked on a range of bilateral, regional, and multilateral trade negotiations and initiatives, including the Trans-Pacific Partnership (TPP), U.S.-China negotiations, and the WTO financial service negotiations. Now, I'd like to also introduce Jin Xu. Is the chairman of China Association of International Trade, and is the president of the University of International Business and Economics International Development Corporation College. He has a very rich professional experience in the international commerce and diplomacy, having worked in various embassy posts in Turkey, UK, and US, and served as the Deputy Director General of Department of American and Oceania Trade Affairs, MOFCOM. And now he's also President of Academy of International Business Officials of MOFCOM. Adam Posen has been the president, our next US guest. He's the president, has been the president of the Peterson Institute for International Economics since January 2013, so almost 10 years ago. During his presidency, the Peterson Institute has won global recognition as the leading independent think tank in international economics. So Peterson Institute has developed a high-level recognition and research partnership in the People's Republic of China. And prior to John Peterson, Adam also worked as an external voting member for the Bank of England, a rate-setting monetary policy committee, and consulted for the UK Cabinet Office for London G20 Summit of 2009 during the global financial crisis. So that was also quite a while ago. Last, but also we have we are really introduced according to the alphabetical order. But now we are coming to another U.S. guest, Mr. Jeremie Waterman. He's the president of the China Center and the vice president for the Greater China and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, one of the very largest commerce in the U.S. He has pioneered a number of chamber business initiatives focused on China, such as U.S.-China CEO Dialogue, which I attended 1 year in Washington. Before joining the chamber, he also served as the Office of United States Trade Representative in the Office of Congressional Affairs and Africa. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce my friend, Minister Xiaozhun. He served 2 terms as the DDJ, Deputy Director General of the WTO from 2013 to 2020. He represented China as a key negotiator in China's WTO accession process. Prior to becoming China's ambassador to WTO in 2011, he was Vice Minister of Commerce in charge of a multilateral and regional trade negotiation and cooperation. He also worked as a diplomat at the Chinese embassy in the United States for more than 4 years, from the late 80s to early 90s. So that's actually quite an impressive panelists we gathered tonight. So I would like to start with this this order that perhaps as we introduced, U.S. and China has actually, after more than 4 decades of diplomatic relations, after 50 years of Nixon's visit, everything has really went well until 5 years ago when President Trump comes up, things starting to really getting deteriorate. But now we're facing such a big challenges. We're facing global pandemic. We're facing the conflict in Ukraine, war going on right now. We're facing the energy crisis, food crisis, high inflation, and slow economic growth, both in China and the U.S. So, what's your take as a business? I mean, as a trade negotiator, as a government representative, how can we really, making things for the sake of the world and making things to avoid the catastrophe that may happen if we continue the path we're currently on? Perhaps, Craig, you can start first, since you are leading a very large chamber of the U.S.-China Business Council. Craig.
Sure. Thank you, Henry, and thank you to all CCG colleagues for putting this meeting together. We need far more U.S.-China dialogue, so we are grateful for your leadership. And it's a great pleasure for me to be here with Wendy, Jinshu, Adam, Jeremie, and Xiaozhun, some old friends that I have not seen for a while. So also, there's never been a better time for this discussion, as the World Bank has cut its forecast for global GDP growth in 2022 to 2.9%, down from 5.7% in 2021. So a cutting of the projected growth rate by 50%. And that is has enormous implications. The World Bank suggests that there are three reasons for the downgrade: Russia's invasion of Ukraine, lockdowns in China, and supply chain disruptions. So I'll make some very brief comments about American business perceptions, particularly towards trade with Asia and with China. If I had to summarize American businesses' overall orientation, I would say that there are many short-term challenges, but still enormous long-term opportunity. But we have to survive the short term to get to the long term. Regarding US trade policy, there's been remarkable consistency between the Trump administration and the Biden administration. While the tone of the two administrations is very different, the substance of the trade policy seems very familiar. Tariffs remain in place. There have been expansions of export controls and sanctions. There seems little interest in market facilitation abroad, and virtually no interest in negotiating new free trade agreements. Because the continued focus of the Biden administration is on defensive elements of trade policy, American companies are supportive of the Biden administration's other economic initiatives, and these would include the US-EU Trade and Technology Council, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework Agreement, and the recently announced Partnership for the Americas. The American business community very much wants greater US engagement with the world, and we understand the administration's wish to focus on supply chains, a multilateral approach to export controls, infrastructure, and investment screening. And we want closer relations with friends in Europe, Asia, and Latin America. At the same time, American companies' views about China are changing. There's a feeling of increased risk and greater volatility. Those American companies who are dependent on supply chains that originate in China are concerned about policies and events that they cannot influence or even predict, or much less manage. Risk is up, costs are up, uncertainty is up, visibility is down. So let me try and break down this uncertainty into four different categories. First, China's dynamic zero COVID strategy adds uncertainty or risk to supply chains that are impossible to model. Maybe a factory 3 or 4 tiers down your supply chain. Maybe a company that you've never heard of before will have to close down, and that could have ripple effects over your company on a global basis. I know of at least one company that had to postpone a global launch of a product due to an unanticipated lockdown in China. Secondly, China's relationship with Russia, as articulated in the February 4th statement of quote unquote friendship without limits, changes the world in quite a significant manner. We're not certain what friendship without limits mean and how this affects other countries' interests, particularly over the longer term. But given Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we could certainly say that political risk is up. Third, it's clear that China's future growth will be lower than past growth. China is transitioning its growth model from a fixed capital investment and net exports growth model to one that will be driven by consumer demand. But this is a hard transition. And on top of that, China's demographics are quite challenging. So while we wish you well, and we do hope that higher quality growth will be achieved, we know that that won't be easy. And fourth, I think that the Chinese government seems to be focused on more on a state-driven trade policy as articulated in the dual circulation policy. It is oriented towards self-reliance in technology, self-reliance in agriculture, and self-reliance in energy. Now, it's hard to say what that means for foreign investors, but foreign investors have become more cautious. So in conclusion, we are optimistic over the longer term. We do expect China to continue to produce $1 trillion of new GDP growth annually for the foreseeable future. And we do hope that China remains the world's largest growth engine for GDP. But this is a complex environment, and companies are notably more cautious than they have previously been. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig. I mean, you have outlined well. I think the potential, all the American business in China, you've been championing that, and of course we are facing a lot of difficulties now. But I think still we see U.S. companies are still largely profitable here in China. So that's right. I mean, the pandemic has separated us for too long. There's a lot of lack of communication as well. I think that China has taken very, very actually a strong stand, actually saying that sovereignty, territorial integrity is absolutely important and should be respected, including Ukraine. Of course, friendship, we will say with every country, friendship is without limit. So there's probably over interpretation into that. But anyway, I think the concern is nevertheless should be addressed. That's why we need more dialogue. But I really hope that maybe we have Wendy, according to this the alphabetical order. But Wendy, you've been really the trade person for the last throughout your career. You've been witness so many negotiations, agreement. You're the really architect. See the TPPs through. Always focus on this Pacific, Asia Pacific. But now we see the protectionism. We see the the free trade is meeting a lot of challenges. It's good to know that MC12 over the last weekend we see some progress on fishery, on patents of the vaccine, the grain export, and things like control. So finally, we're coming to some common sense on how we should move forward. But you are the trade person. You've been so promoting of this area. So what do you think about this current trade relation? How can we really overcome that, particularly the high inflation now we're having in the U.S.? There's a call from the business community. I think even Secretary Yellen and Secretary of Commerce at all suggesting maybe we should, lift the tariff imposed on China, and China should do the same on the U.S. So what do you think? I mean, we should probably really push for some more trade exchange so we can lower the KPI and we can lower the risk of meltdown of world economy. And so as a trade expert, what's your take of the situation? Wendy, please.
Well, thank you very much, Henry. And it's really my honor to join the CCG again for your annual conference and to be on a panel with such distinguished colleagues. You've asked me a lot of questions. I don't have a lot of time, so let me just make a few comments responding to some of the points you made in the opening and just now. And let me just focus on tariffs for a minute. I mean, my perspective on tariffs through the years is they're easy to impose, but they're really hard to lift. And why are they hard to lift? Because once they're put in place, constituencies develop in countries that want to keep these tariffs. They benefit from the tariffs. So they're very vocal. And we're seeing that in the United States, particularly among NGOs and labor. Second, when it comes to tariffs, particularly the China tariffs, there's a burden, an onus on the administration to show what they've gotten in return if they were going to lift some of these tariffs. And frankly, there hasn't been really any progress on addressing the structural issues that have been identified by the United States with respect to the Chinese market. And China hasn't lifted its tariffs, which haven't helped the United States say, well, if China's lifted them, maybe we should lift ours. And so that's the dilemma, I think, that the administration finds itself in now. It's curious, this debate on tariffs now is public, with senior cabinet officials arguing both sides of the debate. And ultimately, the president will have to make the decision. And just this weekend, he said that he's looking at this issue. So what type of decision could the United States make? Well, there are a number of options. They could just leave things as is. They could decide to roll back certain tariffs, particularly those tariffs that have been a heavy burden on US consumers and businesses during this time of inflation. They could reimpose an exclusion process, a full-scale exclusions process, or they could even increase rates on some products and decrease rates or eliminate tariffs on other products. And those are the policy options that they have. And my sense is that soon we'll be hearing what their decisions are. I would just urge my Chinese friends, no matter what we do, but particularly if the United States goes ahead and rolls back some tariffs, that China respond in kind, even for its own reasons. But I think that would be a very positive step. And just as the tariff war led to kind of a downward spiral in tariffs, if you're optimistic, maybe we can see kind of an upward spiral, meaning that if the United States were to roll back some, China could roll back some and even more, and then the United States can respond in kind. I see Adam kind of smiling. I'm sure he'll have some comments on this. Before I conclude, I just wanted to make a few comments on the WTO and the recent ministerial conference in Geneva, because I think there are some interesting developments which haven't gotten a lot of attention. And that is, number one, that with respect to the waiver for intellectual property rights for vaccines, the United States and China were able to work together to find a compromise on the issue of whether this waiver would apply to China. I happened to be in Geneva about a month before the ministerial, and I can tell you both sides were really dug in on their position. China was willing to say publicly, we're not going to avail ourselves to the waiver, but for the United States, that wasn't enough legal certainty. And when you look at the agreement that was reached on TRIPS, there is a footnote which suggests very intense negotiations between the US and China, but we were able to find a pragmatic outcome. And I think that's important, not only for the TRIPS waiver, but potentially for other issues that confront the United States and China in the WTO and elsewhere. And particularly with respect to the issue of whether China is a developing country or not for the purposes of the WTO, this TRIPS waiver compromise, I think, can be viewed as perhaps a model going forward. And my final comment on the ministerial and WTO work going forward is that when folks looked at the WTO in recent years, I think a lot of people were blaming US-China trade tensions for the WTO woes and troubles. But in effect, the US-China trade tensions were not front and center last week in Geneva. In fact, the US and China shared common interests with respect to a number of issues, including the customs moratorium on electronic transmissions, as well as response to the pandemic and response to the food crisis. And so as the WTO moves forward and focuses on reform issues, both with respect to WTO governance and issues like e-commerce, climate change and trade, food, pandemic, et cetera, I think there are opportunities in Geneva for the United States and China to work together more closely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy, for your upbeat, attitudes. I think we really need an upward spiral for that. I mean, if U.S. lift tariff, I'm sure China. Personally, I think China could do the same, and let's have a upward spiral on that. That's a really good news. But what you outlined on the WTO conclusion, which I think not only surprised many, but also the industry, academics, that finally WTO is working, and also shows U.S. China can work together. Those are positive news. I mean, those little news we can really amplify that, and let's get the spirit through into other areas. So now I'd like to have Mr. Jin. You are the Chinese business diplomat. I mean, for many years you were the Minister Trade at the UK just not too long ago. You worked in the US, but also you were actually in DDJ at the US and Oceania Affairs Department at the MOFCOM before. So what's your take? Giving here are two US guests spoke so far. Mr. Jin, please. You have to open your microphone.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I should say thank you very much, Henry. You provided such a good opportunity to meet so many old friends like Craig Allen. We didn't see each other, for more than 10 years. But I still remember 10 years ago, we really had a very good time. We worked together, we traveled, together in China. I know we traveled together, in states, many, places. Also, we joined a lot of meetings together, to listen to Chinese entrepreneurs and American entrepreneurs, how they enjoy the bilateral relations at that time. I mean, the time since 2000 and to the 2010. So I didn't prepare any written speech, but I really have a lot of questions. Actually, I have many questions in my mind. I cannot write them all, on my paper. So I want to take this opportunity to ask Craig Allen. So what's going on now? And we had so many great time together. So what changes or what kind of challenges we are facing now? So Craig Allen, do you remember, 10 years ago, when Chinese enterprises or Chinese buying mission to United States, we visited a lot of, states, actually a lot of very remote places, and almost, all the people, all the entrepreneurs, all the businesses, they welcome Chinese, people, welcome Chinese, buying missions, buying, activities. At that time, we had some, problem like a trade deficit, but we can join our hands. We can solve all the problems together. So that since past 5 years, we had new leaders from America, like Trump and Biden administration, and something changed now. And I really don't know, but also a lot of Chinese enterprises that ask me the same question. So I think, we should join our hands together, again, to solve the problems, to facing all the challenges, not from US, not only from China, actually from the whole world. Now we have the same problem in our economy, like inflation in United States, like Chinese, low GDP, development in recent years. So how can we, solve the problem, through our cooperation? How can American, administration to reduce your tariffs toward China? And I think, of course, China government or Chinese people also, we hope we can do the same thing when we have the same, treatment from US. So, Greg Allen, thank you very much. You invited me again just now, just 10 minutes ago, to go back to US. I'm really looking forward to go back to US since I'm too old. I'm 65 years old. I'm retired, but I think I'll have much more, flexibility if I have my passport to go there. I also want to invite you and your friends from enterprises come to China and talk about our, challenges, talk about our problems, talk about our cooperations between the business people. And so I want to stop here now, Henry, and
Yeah.
probably afterwards I will say I will join the discussion with other friends. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jin. Yeah, so you brought back a lot of good memories. I'm sure, let's really keep some of that spirit. I mean, after all, facing all those upheavals and all those difficult time, it's a moment we have to think back and also think through and how we can really work together. Now I'd like to invite Ed Posen. You are the president of a well-known think tank in the world. I mean, and also we've been talking last year also on this topic too. You do a lot of international economic research and also very strong on Chinese economic research, but also the inflation that your institute has been doing a lot. Even analyze, if the tariff is lifted from China, that could maybe trigger to, a few pound, maybe 1% of cut down the inflation in the U.S. So, as experts on the economy for the U.S. and also a strong research on China. So, what do you think about this tariff and how we can, at this critical time now, with the war, with the pandemic, with the all the crises going to happen, probably we may have a famine, down the roads in the fall time. So, the shortage of food and the shortage of energy. China, 70% of energy depends on import. These high prices will hit China too. So what's your thinking of how we can do something to cut down those inflation and really U.S. and China can work together when they face in the common challenges like those economic recession that is down the road. So, Adam, your turn, please.
Thank you very much for including me again in the CCG ongoing dialogues. And it's very nice and honor for me to be on a panel with so many distinguished folks in the U.S., China, and Chinese trade field. I'll come back to being in a similarly, I hope, pragmatic optimist position to Wendy, but I'll start on the inflation front. China's entry into active world trade, not just formally into the WTO, coincided with, but I don't think actually caused a general low inflation in the world. That is evident by the fact that we are talking about at Peterson. My colleagues Gary Huffbauer, Megan Hogan, and Yilin Wang have done the work about how changing tariffs on China would make a material difference to inflation, but would only affect a small portion of the total inflation we see now. Inflation remains primarily a short-term macroeconomic outcome. And the reason I want to emphasize that is twofold. First, we have made the case, and our board vice chair, Larry Summers, has encouraged and utilized our work to further make the case that it should be what we would call a no-brainer for the Biden administration to lift the tariffs on Chinese goods in US's own self-interest on inflation as well as in general. The fact that they have not, and as Wendy and others have described, there's a dispute over this, shows you just how strong the anti-China and anti-trade feelings are in the US Congress. And that's a sad reality. I think we're forcing them to show their true colors to some degree by having this out there, these studies of what difference it would make and how little the tariffs have accomplished. But I think we all have to recognize what this shows. The second reason I want to emphasize that trade with China and China's role in the world economy is not the main driver of inflation or deflation is because it says again that we can try to walk and chew gum at the same time. We can try to separate those issues where China and the US together or the multilateral system or the G20 can make progress from those issues where it seems hard to do so, but we should still try to make progress on that. And so turning that around, picking up on what several of the panels speaking before me have said about the relative to expectation success of the WTO ministerial that just completed, I think, as others have said, it is potentially a positive model to see China and the US not getting in the way of each other, perhaps starting out with conflicting positions and ultimately on the TRIPS waiver and on other things, essentially saying de jure, China doesn't rescind its developing country status, but de facto it does for things that involve real developing countries. And so in that sense, I want to go back to something, Henry, that you and I spoke about, I think the last time I was on a CCG panel, which is, I think right now there's not that much good to be done in the bilateral US-China relationship, but it would be, I think, good for world peace, good for things like vaccines and disease control, good against hunger, and good for longer term development if the US and China could agree on some rules of the road for how they treat the rest of the world. And in particular, that we do not go down a bidding war with other countries, be it Argentina or Chad or Vietnam, that there's healthy competition among businesses and private investment, but that we do not see ourselves as forcing other economies to choose one side or the other. And I think there are practical steps we can take together to reduce that risk. So that, building on the kind of pragmatic optimism, limited, but I think real, that came out of the ministerial, and how much better that did than, say, the G20 meeting around the IMF spring meetings when there could not be even a communique, shows that if we get away from the Russia-China linkages and the direct US-China disputes, we may be able to do constructive things on climate change and global health and development. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, absolutely, right. You mentioned about this, global good. I mean, both U.S. and China has a moral responsibility. I think, if the war is okay, we can maybe fight a bit. But now that the war is really in big trouble, we really have to work together. I mean, there's no choice. And U.S. and China being the two largest economies, so we're so appreciate and value that MC12 WTO ministerial meeting that we have achieved some progress. Of course, Secretary John Kerry and the Chinese Minister Xiaozhun are working on the climate change. And I know the top diplomat Yang Jie has met Sullivan just recently. And the defense minister of China in Shangri-La Dialogue has answered the 11, 12 questions on the spot, and has met 6 bilateral ministerial meetings. So we hope, I'm sure the pandemic, at least, the quarantine probably is coming to the end. Let's start dialogue and meeting and give some, even if it's small news, let's really promote that and have upward spirit, like Wendy mentioned. So now I'd like to have our friend, the Jeremie. I mean, I was at your organized CEO summit in Washington, 2019 was great. I mean, it was such a we were hoping that China and US was signing a trade deal, and everybody was so bullish there, talking about expanding in China, having new office in China. And I remember it was exactly just before President Trump, put on hold on that trade deal. So what's your take? You are the largest chamber in the U.S. I mean, you're representing such a large stakeholder of the U.S. economy. So what's your take? You probably have even more broader perspective in the business community. Jeremie, your turn.
Well, thank you, Henry. And like the others before me, I'll just say it's an honor to join CCG's 8th China and Globalization Forum. Very much appreciate CCG's efforts to promote dialogue and understanding at this crucial time in U.S.-China relations, and really at this crucial juncture in the global economy. So congratulations to you, to your colleagues. I'll just say, so much has been said already on this panel, obviously a very distinguished, esteemed panel. So I'll try to be brief and not repeat too much. But I would say, first of all, you're right. As the largest business organization in the United States, we do have I think a broader perspective, both on U.S.-China relations and of course the global economy, and certainly the U.S. economy. Our members range from small businesses and chambers of commerce across the country that support their communities, to the leading industry associations and global corporations that innovate and solve for the world's challenges, as well as to the fast and emerging industries that are shaping the future. We at the Chamber's China Center for the better part of 2 decades have documented both the growth of the U.S.-China economic relationship and the challenges posed by China's trade and investment regime for U.S. competitiveness and market access. We have long advocated for a very balanced and rational approach to commercial relations with China, one that recognizes the importance of a market of 1.4 billion people while managing the realities of China's political and economic models. As we all know and appreciate, the U.S.-China bilateral relationship will have sweeping implications, already has and will continue to, beyond our 2 countries, for the world. That's why I think, Henry, we're all gathered here under this banner of CCG and globalization. Craig is exactly right. China remains a very important market for many American companies. Foregoing the market for many is simply not an option if they wish to be competitive globally. But as the global economy teeters amidst, as the global economy teeters amidst soaring inflation in the United States and other Western countries, energy price spikes and acute food shortages stemming from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, obviously the economic slowdown that you've talked about, Henry, and the supply chain disruptions in China as it manages through dynamic zero COVID, and of course the new variants. We shouldn't forget that we are still in a pandemic that is very much moving forward. Maintaining and growing commercial ties between the U.S. and China in a mutually beneficial manner will be central, in our view, to ensuring global economic stability in the months and certainly years ahead. Obviously, the Chamber, we are doing what we can at home here in the United States. We're working with our lawmakers to enact policies that strengthen U.S. competitiveness at home and abroad. Obviously, President Biden signed an infrastructure bill last year that we were very supportive and excited about. We're also hoping that lawmakers in the Congress will reach a consensus on a final package in the coming weeks to support the U.S. semiconductor industry and other parts of our innovative economy. And beyond our shores, we're pushing the administration to knock down barriers to trade and support agreements around the world. Of course, we also want a level playing field in and with China, where American business can compete in a fair environment. 4 decades of our economic engagement, linkages involving trillions of dollars in wealth, assets, and commercial flows have been built up, with benefits accruing to both countries and their peoples. But I think, Henry, you started, I think your opening comments were perhaps sadly on point. And as we've already heard this evening, there is much greater risk around those linkages today as momentum continues to build toward a future in which the two countries are less engaged. As Evan Greenberg, the esteemed CEO of Chubb, underscored in a major address last week at CSIS, that's not what the American business community wants. But barring a shift in trajectory, which doesn't seem terribly likely at present, one has to assume that the pressure to at least selectively disengage, driven by concerns about national security and competitiveness, will remain. And of course, that's on both sides. Our sincere hope at the Chamber is that the two governments, supported by their business communities, will continue to work together to improve the business environment in both countries, address those structural concerns in the relationship, as Wendy mentioned, find a path forward on tariffs, and avoid a wide-ranging decoupling that would be bad for both countries and leave the world considerably worse off. Of note, we are hopeful that when President Biden and President Xi talk next, which we hope will be very soon, the two can make some progress on trade, including tariffs. We've heard a lot about tariffs, a lot of questions about tariffs, and a lot of a view, I think, that tariffs on both sides have not been helpful. We urge the two leaders to turn periodic talks into progress and action. So I will, with that, obviously, as our elected leaders shape the future of bilateral relations, conversations like this one under the auspices of CCG are critical to demonstrate our support and commitment to reaching productive solutions that can guide our path forward. So again, congratulations to you, and yield back whatever time I have left. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jeremie, for your great comments. I think absolutely the business community wants to see things that a bit normal. We don't want to see decouple. I mean, because it takes so long to get to the stage we are now. And you talk about President Biden's infrastructure bill. I mean, China has also developed the worldwide infrastructure. So maybe someday, U.S. and Chinese company can work together on infrastructure in third countries. And also, I was talking to Larry Summers the other day in our dialogue. He was suggesting that the World Bank maybe should be replenished with more fund on green, on infrastructure. I think we have World Bank, AIB, ADB, and AFDB. All those development banks maybe can work together. I mean, after WTO progress, maybe. So thank you, Jeremie, and hope to see you in China again. You being a frequent traveler, in the past number of years, haven't seen you for the last 2 years. Hope to see you soon. But now I'd like to invite our advisor for CCG, but also a very key speaker that we invited, Minister Xiaozhun. You've been serving as a Vice Minister of China, Minister of Commerce. You served in the U.S. Embassy, ambassador to WTO, and also the DJ for WTO for almost 10 years. So you come back now. You're working still very active on the research and development on those new trade issues. So what's your take? I mean, you are the last but not the least. We'd like to hear from you. Minister Yi, please.
Thank you very much, Huiyao. I'm also very pleased. Actually, I'm very excited to join some of my old friends for this CCG's conference. I didn't see Craig for more than 30 years, right? So as my response to the comments by previous speakers, let me share with you some of my views on the importance of US-China cooperation to meet global challenges. I'm very much concerned that this Russia-Ukraine conflict could be the spark that lights a bonfire of accumulated global economic problems, from disrupted supply chains and spiraling inflation to unsustainable debts and disrupted and macroeconomic imbalances. If the conflict continues or worse escalates, its destructive impact will reach far beyond Ukraine and Europe, leading to energy and food shortages, stalled growth, and the real, possibly a major global economic crisis on a scale not seen since the great financial crisis of 2008. The 2008 crisis was devastating, but its one silver lining was all major economies, in particular the US and China, demonstrated the political will to cooperate at that critical juncture, forging the G20, undertaking unprecedented collaboration within the IMF, World Bank, and the WTO, and taking the collective steps needed to prevent the crisis from spiraling out of control to lay the groundwork for global recovery. But what worries me most is that due to the current geopolitical tensions, 3 Bretton Woods institutions responsible for global economic governance are in various stages of disrepair or dysfunction. And the G20, the last line of defense against financial crisis, is seemingly paralyzed. It's unclear whether the G20 leaders and ministers can even meet in the same room, let alone achieve the concerted policy coordination needed to head off economic disaster. Faced with a new financial crisis or the next pandemic, there's every sign that countries will resort to me first, beggar than neighbor policies, thus making a bad situation far worse. Being the world's largest economies and trading nations, both the US and China will lose out if they continue to distrust each other and choose to let the situation drift. The whole world will be much better off if they do the opposite. What can be done? Let me suggest 3 steps that could help repair, even restore, global economic cooperation. First, countries, especially the US, Europe, and China, need to acknowledge their common economic interests. Our geopolitical differences make the headlines, but I would argue that it's our shared geoeconomic interests that are more important and salient. Whether it's transitioning to low carbon energy, spurring technological innovation, managing digitalization, addressing domestic inequalities, or strengthening rule-based economic relations. We have more in common than we realize, including a common interest in cooperating. And we need to focus more on that essential fact. Second, the US and China need to identify the areas of economic cooperation where they generally see eye to eye and can achieve meaningful progress and mutually beneficial results. One good example is the progress made in the G20 on a global minimum corporate tax. The environment, from deforestation to plastic pollution to even carbon pricing, is even more important area where China and the US face similar challenges, have similar objectives, and can find cooperative solutions if they are prepared to be more open-minded, creative, and collaborative about it. The WTO's surprising success, as mentioned by Wendy, at this recent 12th Ministerial Conference demonstrates how the multilateral trading system can deliver even under the most challenging circumstances when countries, in particular, the largest ones, focus on producing outcomes that benefit everyone. The significant outcomes from MC12 of the WTO are unthinkable without the support by the US and China. Here is what the WTO Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala tweeted after the conference. China-USA cooperation was instrumental in getting to positive outcomes. Third, we need to focus on restoring trust. 4 decades of globalization has made the world dramatically better off, but it's also made us more interdependent. That's the price of our prosperity. Of many ties binding the global economy together, the most important is trust. Our willingness to lower barriers, depend on one another, work with rather than against each other. If cooperation seems to be breaking down, it's because suspicion has replaced the trust between the US and China, between Europe and China, even between EU and the US. Rebuilding trust begins with rediscovering the benefits of working together. The last thing the world economy needs right now is more mistrust, more fragmentation, more delusions that we can solve our shared global challenges on our own. Let me stop here.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Yi, for your very comprehensive comments. I mean, you also made quite a few recommendations. I think absolutely. I mean, we see the Bretton Woods system is actually probably not functioned well. That we need to upgrade, improve, enhance. But that system that has carried us for the last 77 years needs to be strengthened but improved. And also maybe we've added more new institutions like AIB and other institutions like you mentioned about digital, data. I mean, there's many things we could add to the new dimension. So WTO is a great story that we see some revival of that. Let's have this kind of revival spirit, carried through to the other institutions and into business. I mean, we also see the G20 is coming. We had an Indonesian ambassador here talking at the CCG today about how busy they are prepared for the G20 and how there are high expectations for that. There will be a minister meeting soon, and seems all the G20 leaders will be there. That'd be really great. Now we have about a half hour left, but I think we'll probably go for another round, but briefly. And so after our first round of talking, we seems have all felt that China and the US, being the 2 largest economy, has some responsibility to work together, even though we have a lot of differences. So how can we really make things working together? I mean, given the world is facing larger threats, climate change, pandemic, and famine and energy crisis, all those big threats that facing the mankind. We shouldn't have a vacuum there. I mean, there's a vacuum of global coordination and cooperation, particularly as the U.S. been in charge of this global governance for so many years. Now we are in the process of finding ways to how we can work together between China and the U.S. So this is really important. So probably I'll start with Wendy again, and of course Minister Yi mentioned about corporate minimum tax. That's something China working with U.S. and now the IPR for the vaccine, another area. Climate change, we had a joint statement So on the trade, how we can really further work together. I mean, given the inflation is so high now, and let's find a graceful way to get out of this. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning that there's already things easier to set it up, difficult to get it done. But inflation is a big incentive, and the American consumers, the voters. President Trump is facing a midterm election. It's probably time to do some, release some of the inflation pressure, and the same is true for China. We need that too, after COVID actually really attacked the Chinese economy this year. So we all need some leadership and political will, and let's really continue this upward momentum at the WTO, hopefully. So let's have some final thought on that. Wendy, I start from you.
Well, thank you. And I listened carefully to everyone's comments, which I think were great. Yeah, just a few responses. Number one, on tariffs, it's interesting because China has been very vocal about how these tariffs have been unhelpful, destructive, and should be lifted. But they always point to the United States to go first. And so one thing I just want to put on the table, why doesn't China go first? Why doesn't China take the initiative and just eliminate, let's just say, tariffs on $25 billion worth of US imports and see how the United States responds? In other words, I'm not sure why it's our responsibility to go first. In the old days when, I was in the government and Minister Yi was, we had that kind of engagement where I think we could pick up the phone and maybe orchestrate something like this. But I don't think that kind of engagement is present today, which is unfortunate. But again, I want to just put that on the table as well. And I think that China would be pushing on an open door in the United States because there are many here who want to lift tariffs. But as Adam mentioned, it's complicated, particularly given our politics. I'm fully supportive of trying to find areas to cooperate on, particularly using international institutions. I think that makes it a lot easier for the United States and China to cooperate. But I think it's important that we recognize there's little trust. I don't think we should start big. I think we should start small, find very practical areas where we could quietly make progress and build on that over time. I think this kind of top-down trying to, resume big dialogues and take on, mega issues, I think kind of dooms us for failure. So my recommendation is to kind of start small. I mean, Minister Yi, mentioned plastics pollutions, or, we talked about the TRIPS waiver. I think that since there's such a lack of trust and confidence between both sides, starting small and just scoring some wins, I think over time could help us challenge the larger issues.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, absolutely. I think we need to do that. I think that there's high, I understand that there's high expectation from China to see US maybe do something first, because the US started first to add it on, and they want to see US drop first. But I'm sure China will respond correspondingly. I'm personally quite sure of that. But let's hear from Craig. I mean, you are close to the business community that does business in China and outside world. It's probably more from US business concern. And also I saw some congressmen has, 100 some people has actually also called for some lifting of that. So what's their, the intention, and how business is really viewing that?
So thank you. President Xi and President Biden have met virtually at least twice, and both times they have called for confidence building measures, or we could call them CBMs. And the business community entirely supports that. and is delighted to be able to provide some ideas on what on ways that would be mutually beneficial to start small. I think, as Wendy very correctly said. But at least thus far, I have no progress to report. And I think that we're entering into quite a political period, both in China and in the United States. And but November will be upon us quite quickly. And perhaps we should be preparing for confidence building measures in the immediate immediately after the 20th Party Congress and the midterm elections. November is around the corner. I do have to say that despite the fact that our platform today is a Center for China and Globalization, that there seems to be a tendency or a risk that companies and governments are going to be focused on regional economies rather than the global economy. And I think that that is dangerous. It's not either or, it's melding the two. And I was quite inspired by Xiaozhun's comments that we do need to strengthen the global norms, even as we strengthen or invest on a more regional basis. One cannot have a regionalization without a strong global economy, and one cannot have a strong global economy without strong regional economies. So that, but companies are thinking more on a regional basis. How secure is my supply chain? Can I avoid a single point of failure? What are my political risks? How do I keep costs low and maintain efficiency with flexibility? And I think that that nexus between regional trade policies and global trade policies deserves to be studied further. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Craig. Yes. I think we all need small progress, but you are right. You know, November is really crucial month. I mean, probably by then, you know, the 20th Party Congress and the midterm election has already happened, and then we gather the G20 with a fresh start. Probably, you know, let's really, you know, do some work to pay for that, and so that we can get more pragmatic, more realistic after all those upheavals and economic slowing down and pandemic. So we really need a fresh start. I think the maintain that momentum and small progress is absolutely crucial. Let's build on that. Wendy mentioned about you know, waivers on Tariffs and plastic initiative. I remember Minister Yi invited me to WTO 2 years ago to talk about that issue. Now finally we see some progress, and also this issue about a global corporate minimum tax, so important, because we see a lot of companies making a lot of money overseas, but then their money is in the tax haven, not really back to the Midwest or Rust Belt, where China often become a scapegoat for that. So this minimum tax will really help to address that kind of a concern, probably partially, I hope, so that China would not be felt has made money all the time, because multinationals actually can balance quite a bit of that with the minimum tax. That I think is really in the right direction. I see Mr. Jin is coming back. So Mr. Jin, I mean, now I would like to ask you again, what's your you know, take so far, and what do you think about China-U.S. relation going forward? You as the Deputy Director General of American Oceania Affairs at the MOFCON. So what do you see the trade prospects between our two countries?
I really agree, you know, on the, you know, friends above, you know, we need to take some steps. Who go first, US or China? But it doesn't matter, you know, we have already had a lot of tremendous changes in bilateral relations. but many things still remain the same, like our economy, our mutual, desire in our products, and also we have a lot of common changes, common challenges like climate changing, and also we are facing a lot of difficulties in our economies. I said it before, like inflation in US and Chinese GDP, growth rate slowed down. Also, but we have already, do many things. We have many things remain the same, like even we have a COVID, for past 3 years, we still have a lot of people, rushing to United States, especially young people, study in different colleges, different universities. Also, still a lot of business people, they want to export their products and export more products to U.S. market. Also, we have a lot of American businesses people, they want to reduce your inflation, so you need to import more things from China, and so that's our mutual desire for the coming years. So I agree, Mr. Minister Yi's idea. We should build up our mutual trust in the future, for the time being especially. So who go first? Craig Allen, you or China? I think you have your tariffs, first. We should do some concrete steps in the future. Probably we can take the common, steps together. And but it's time now. It's time now. We cannot delay anymore. And that's for the interest of China, and also for the interest of the United States, and also that's a hope for sorry. Okay, let's stop here now.
Okay, good. Thank you, Mr. G. You say something good, attract, birds to fly on you. Good.
Yeah.
No, I think it's very, very important, as you mentioned, to build up the trust. Let's do that. I think, this dialogue is really great. I mean, I feel encouraged, and, we should have corresponding moves on both sides. And, given the world has needed US-China to work together. And we see such a, well boosted perception of WTO after, US-China worked out some new arrangement, and WTO has really achieved some progress. So this is really great progress that US-China can work together, and we must work together. So Adam, you are now in London. You've been traveling across Atlantic and Pacific for many years. So what's your, from a think tank perspective, what's your analysis for the future US-China economic relations? How we can really, while remain our differences, try to maximize our common ground, particularly economy. We've been built up this economy for the last 5 decades now. This is Nixon's 50 years anniversary visit to China. I mean, it has built up so intertwined, people to people, tourism, infrastructure, all the things together. How can we really decouple that? I mean, unless we really think about, we cannot really get along. We're not human beings. I mean, to that extent. So, your final comments, please.
Well, thank you, Henry. I would just say that we're starting a project at the Peterson Institute trying to assess what decoupling would look like. How we didn't want to think about it because it was, for all the reasons you said, for all the reasons Evan Greenberg said the other day, that I've said, Fred Bergson said, it's a terrible thought. But at this point, I think we have to start showing just how costly it would be and make that case. But beyond that, I think it is interesting and important. You mentioned transatlantic, for China to take EU seriously as an actor, and for the US to take the EU seriously as an actor, and hope that the EU lives up to that, because essentially it's I don't want to say it's the swing vote, but on a number of issues, particularly in climate, but also international taxation, as was rightly mentioned, the Europeans are at a higher standard than either the US or China. And to the degree the Europeans can push both our governments to be more aspirational, more principled, I think is going to be very important in the years ahead. I think when push comes to shove, we all know that there are two competing forces, that the values and security interests Europe shares with the US are greater than those it shares with China. But Europe, in particular European businesses' desire to free ride on the US and stay out of conflict with China is very strong. And we have to hope that this turns from being a problem to being what I'd call a ballast, a weight that keeps the relationship from getting too off track, because Europe will be a counterweight between US and China. And I think, as much as I respect the minister and my friend Wendy and others talking about the international institutions, I think a lot will be determined by that trilateral relationship, as well as where Japan and Australia and Singapore come in. And I think that China at the moment, like the US, is doing both sides of its mouth to these countries, in some ways a bully, in some ways a friend. US and China doing the same. So we'll have to see how that works out. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Adam. Yes. Yeah, you talk about this European and EU, and it's a really important trilateral relation. You're right. I think, but China is EU's largest trading partner, and China is also 130 nations largest trading partner. So we see, last year, even during the pandemic, China's export has gone up almost 30%. So you see, the world is really need China, and how can we really maintain a healthy, constructive relation is really a challenge to all of us. So Jeremie and Waterman, and you are following all the business, and so what's there? I mean, in general, of U.S. business community senses on this China-U.S. relation, trade relations, tariff, and all those things.
So let me make 4 points, and it's a great question. First point, and at the risk of speaking for all 4 Americans on this call, I think all of us would like to see the tariffs, if most of them, if not all of them, come down. I think there's a consensus there. Certainly, the organization that I represent and the organization that Craig runs, I think we both have been very forthright about our desire to see those tariffs come down, that those tariffs do more harm to the United States than they do than they benefit in any way. And I think there's an opportunity right now, as you mentioned, given where we are with inflation, and given perhaps the sentiment in both countries and the economic challenges in both countries, there's an opportunity to make progress. So we're hopeful on tariffs. We're hopeful that we don't have to wait until after our political process in November concludes and China's political process later this fall concludes to see some movement in that area. The second point I'd make about cooperation, I think cooperation hopefully would not be regarded as zero sum. Cooperation both sides should move forward with cooperation because it's in shared interest, in China's interest to do so, in the US interest to do so. And that means that cooperation, those efforts should be insulated from what are obviously a very clear set and arguably growing set of differences between the two sides. If cooperation is conditioned, in an area where it clearly makes sense to work together, but it is conditioned on areas of difference, then it's very hard to cooperate. The third point, which is related to that, would be that we have to be clear-eyed about the cooperation, and there needs to be more work to identify where cooperation really is mutually beneficial. Obviously, it was very difficult, notwithstanding the outcome at MC12 on the vaccine waiver. It was very difficult. It was a very difficult issue for the US and China to navigate, and is part of the reason why negotiators had to stay there overtime. So I think, deciding where it makes really the two governments actually working together to identify those areas. And the final point would be, I think we need to cooperate, but we should also be realistic about what cooperation can do based on the area of cooperation, right? So obviously, during the SED and then later the SNED, we had many cooperative initiatives that were where we had outcomes. In fact, I think Craig was in the government at that time. Wendy was in the government. Maybe Jinshu was still. You can remember long lists of cooperative outcomes. The reality, though, is those cooperative outcomes did not move the needle among the populations and among the governments more broadly. So I think there also needs to be a dose of realism there. Now we're living in a different age. We're living in an age of ESG, of climate change, and so forth. And so these areas that may not have resonated as much in the past may resonate much more today. But I think a dose of realism is also in order as we assess future prospects. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Jeremie. Really great comments, and we see the business community still quite practical and wants to see we make some progress. I think so. Our government on both sides should do something. I really hope that we can meet the needs for that. So finally, Minister Yi, I mean, you've been following closely on the multilateral, of course, but also China-US relations too. So what's your final recommendation and comments? You have to open your mic.
I'm sorry. I think all the panelists here share very similar views. We are all business friendly. We are all very pro bilateral trade relations, and we want to contribute to that movement. And I fully agree with the previous speakers that we should work together. I mean, China and the US should work together to move little by little. I agree with Wendy. Look at MC12. All those issues, I mean, China and the US share very similar interests on e-commerce moratorium. I mean, we share the same interest. On food export ban, we can work together. We can support each other. And on TRIPS waiver, I mean, China didn't take advantage of that negotiations, but China has to pay. But that's fine. I mean, as long as it's a public good and China is happy to make its contribution. So in the future, I think we can find a lot of more areas to work together multilaterally. For example, on plastic pollution, I mean, before I left Geneva, I personally tried very hard to launch the initiative. I mean, not me, but by WTO members led by China and Fiji on our joint initiative on plastic pollution control or governance initiative in the WTO. I think that is very much in the same interest of the US, of the EU and other developing countries. I think those countries can work together on those issues. And as long as they can start from those small steps, then we can see that the trust will come back little by little, but steadily. And finally, let me add one more point. Personally, I don't think decoupling is a good idea. I worked on the WTO for many years. I know that its major role is to promote global economic integration and trade liberalization. But right now, what we are seeing is the major economies are focusing much more on trade defense than on opening up trade. That is a real pity. I mean, for me, I would very much like to see some progress in MC12 on trade liberalization, but it didn't happen. I'm even more concerned of a world fragmenting into distinct economic blocs with different ideologies, political systems, technology standards, cross-border payment, trade systems, as well as reserve currencies. It's terrible. The DG of the WTO warned recently, we need to think carefully before talking very carelessly about decoupling and deglobalization. She said, countries should think twice before they split up economies and supply chains into political blocs. And WTO economists have estimated that if the world split into two trading blocs, it would lower the long-run level of real global GDP by about 5%. It's a big number. It's my dream, maybe I'm not realistic, that instead of a zero-sum world of economic nationalism, both the US and China could work together to promote a positive-sum world of economic cooperation, because interdependence would give countries a stake in each other's success. Let me stop here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Minister Yi. I think we're running out of time, but we have made, I think, a very comprehensive, but also quite constructive discussion and dialogue with all the senior panelists from both US and China. I mean, you are all experts, and CCG is really pleased to have you on this CCG annual China and Globalization Forum. So we really have learned a lot. And I think, yeah, we have some consensus that both first, I think we all recognize we all need to work together. Ahead of us, we cannot afford not to cooperate. Third, we have made some small progress at the WTO recent MC12 minister meetings. And also we agree that tariff is not good, and both countries probably should bring it down. And so we have, and also the business community are still the backbone of China-US relations, and we all need each other. And also people-to-people exchanges are still vital. And of course, we because of time, we haven't touched other issues. But I think this is a very good outcome of our dialogue. I really hope that we can see you next year at our real forum. And again, I appreciate all your participation. I know that from our US guests as participants on a holiday. I mean, today is a holiday for you in the US. I really appreciate that. And we have many people watching on our room, but also we're going to make it a broadcast later on the record as well. So again, I mean, thank you so much. I would like to thank, according to this alphabetic order, Craig Allen, the president of US-China Business Council, Wendy Cutler, vice president, Asia Society Policy Institute, former acting deputy US trade representative, Jin Xu, president of China Association of International Trade, Adam Posen, president, Peterson Institute for International Economics, Also, Jeremie Waterman, President of China, and also Vice President, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Minister Xiaozhun, former Deputy Director General of WTO, former Vice Minister of Commerce. So we have to end it here, and I would like to thank you again very much. Appreciate all your participation, and thank for audience.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.